So, who do you trust more, a doctor, a politician, or a journalist? Well, a study by Herman Wasserman of UCT and Dani Madrid-Morales at the University of Houston suggests that most South Africans are more likely to believe scientific sources than the government when it comes to the handling of the pandemic. This is according to an online survey on trustworthy COVID sources. To tell us more, I'm joined by Professor Herman Wasserman, Professor of Media Studies at the UCT Center of Film and Media Studies. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. So I understand that there is a global issue with fake news around COVID-19. Who you can trust, who you can't, all these conspiracy theories that continue to do the rounds. What exactly did your online survey set out to discover?
Well, as you say, there is currently, people are overwhelmed with information. They often do not know where to go to find trustworthy information, and there's also a lot of disinformation and conspiracy theories doing the rounds. So what we set out to discover, or we tried to establish, and this was with the support from the World Health Organization's Africa Infodemic Response Alliance, we set out to find out where people were actually getting their information about COVID-19 from, and which of those sources they trusted most. And then we also conducted a small experiment online to test people's views and attitudes towards vaccinations.
Oh, that's a real hot potato one. So how many people did you survey? What sort of questions did you ask them?
We surveyed about 1,500 people online. So these views do represent those South Africans with access to the web, where that's a limitation of the study. But it's a fairly big group of people. And what we asked them is what media they consumed, which of those sources of information they trusted most, and also their attitudes towards COVID-19 in general. And then we also asked them how they would evaluate the government's response to the pandemic. And this was also a follow-up really to a survey that we did last year, more or less at the same time. And so we could compare how their attitudes and their views of these various sources compared.
All right, so tell me about your results. What did you discover?
No, so we asked them about a range of sources. We listed a number of potential sources from doctors, scientists, television, radio, news, websites, family, friends, and so on. And we asked them, among other questions, we asked them which of those sources do they trust the most. And so doctors came up in the first place, so that's encouraging in the sense that people tend to trust the science, and this also confirms another previous survey that we did where people do trust scientific sources, although they often still share misinformation. The WHO was in second place, and then a range of surprisingly traditional news sources, considering that this was an online survey. So television, radio, news websites, they all were fairly high on the trust index. And also family. People tended to trust what information they got from the family. But only after doctors, WHO, television, radio, news websites, family, only then they said they would trust the government. And the survey also indicates a decline in the approval of the government's handling of the pandemic. When we conducted this similar study a year ago, the approval rating was considerably higher. So there seems to have been a decline in the trust and the approval rating of the government around the COVID-19 pandemic.
I mean, it's really interesting because if you look at the way our government has handled COVID-19, that first lockdown, it seemed like South Africa was acting quickly, not in denial, as we saw President Donald Trump at the time saying, oh, this will all be over by Easter last year, how wrong he was. Our president was lauded for being absolutely frank and open about what we needed to do and why we needed to do it. And I think that there was a sense of optimism that we might be able to curtail the worst of it. Then, of course, unfortunately, came all the COVID corruption scandals, and then the second wave, and I think that's really where it knocked South Africa, that we realized what we were dealing with. And now, of course, we're in the midst of the third wave, and our health minister's on special leave. There's a special investigating unit report into his alleged involvement in a scandalous media tender. So it's all sort of gone downhill, perhaps, from there. Do you think that's what your survey is exactly reflecting?
Well, we didn't ask them specifically the reasons for those, so we can only surmise those. But I would also, similar to your analysis, I would say that the survey was fielded around the time when Minister Mkhize went on special leave as a result of these corruption allegations. It was also a field at the time when the vaccine rollout suffered this second setback, the Johnson & Johnson consignment that had to be destroyed, and the vaccine rollout that was seen to be stuttering. So I think this did come in the midst of all those crises, and there might also be just a fatigue in general after a year. So all these factors might have played a role. We can't say for certain because we didn't test for exactly those causes of the level of distrust, but that seems to be accurate. I would agree.
You mentioned earlier that you also spoke about vaccines specifically, and we know that there's so much fake news around vaccines. Tell us what you asked and what you discovered.
Well, we asked them, firstly in the survey, we asked them about vaccine attitudes, and we showed them a Facebook post that included a video encouraging citizens to get vaccinated. And this is one of the WHO's viral facts messages. So it's an actual post that we manipulated a little bit to make it look like it had been posted from different accounts. So two of these accounts were branded as from political parties in South Africa, the ANC and the DA. And two were institutional accounts, the WHO and the National Department of Health. And these were the same messages, but seemed to be coming from different accounts. And we found that media users' intentions to get vaccinated, in other words, their eagerness to get vaccinated, weren't particularly swayed by which political party they did the posting. So the intention to get the COVID-19 shot remained very high. And this, I think, confirms findings by other researchers, like the NIDS-CRAM study that showed that there's actually quite a high level of vaccine acceptance. But it did seem to matter quite a bit whether people saw the message coming from WHO or whether it came from a political party, in terms of whether they would share that and they would pass that message on. And so whether they were more likely to share information that came from the WHO than they would from political parties.
I note that you had a University of Houston partner. Do you have any sort of global yardstick? And I'm thinking both in terms of how much we trust our doctors, how much we rate our government in terms of the pandemic, and how we might compare.
Well, we can't say exactly, this wasn't a comparative study, although we did do comparative studies previously, and I think in general one could say that the perceived exposure to disinformation in Africa, and largely, in not only in our country, seems to be higher than that in the US, in fact. So people would feel that they are surrounded by more disinformation, actually, than people in the US would. I think what is encouraging is that there is a high level of trust in science, and we also see that there's quite a high level of trust in established news media sources. So, overall, the television, radio, newspapers were trusted more than social media. So, although we didn't do that precise comparison in this study, I think there are some encouraging signs in this study. Although, of course, I think the disapproval of the government's handling of the pandemic and the overall low levels of trust in the ANC should be a warning, I think, to government communicators that not only are pro-vaccine messages enough, and they also have to make sure that there's trust in the messenger. Otherwise, people won't trust the message itself.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Fascinating research. That, of course, is Professor Herman Wasserman, Professor of Media Studies in the Center of Film and Media Studies at UCT.